Hi, everybody. So this is my PowerPoint that I created over my research paper that I did. And the topic that I choose to study was creative interventions used in childhood trauma therapy. And there you can see my name and the lovely class information that we have. So to get started, I thought that it would be best to go ahead and explain what is child trauma. So child trauma is defined by Northwestern University as a scary, dangerous, violent, or life-threatening event that happens to a child, which is between the age of 0 to 18 years old. And so obviously anybody that has learned or experienced trauma themselves knows that that is a very broad and vague definition of trauma. And I think that is the point of the definition, is just to kind of give us a foundational understanding of what trauma could look like. Children may experience intense guilt, confusion, or feelings of helplessness when it comes to experiencing trauma, as do most people that experience trauma. There is a difference between children and adults experiencing trauma, as you can see in the next bullet point. It states that many times children lack the social, cognitive, and emotional intelligence to accurately describe or understand or even process a traumatic event. So the difference between adults and children that are experiencing trauma is that children just simply don't have the tools or capabilities to fully understand what exactly is happening to them, why it's happening, or even just that it's not their fault, that it's nothing that they did to cause this. And so that definitely adds a layer of difficulty when it comes to children that are experiencing trauma. So using creative interventions can make it easier for a counselor to build rapport and allow for easier communication for the child. So children that have experienced trauma obviously face some, emotional and social difficulties, maybe struggle to open up to adults, maybe even struggle to trust adults, as one could understand. And so these creative interventions have come about as fun and interactive ways for children to express their emotions and to easier communicate with the counselor, and vice versa with the counselor to the child. So as you can see right here, it says adults struggle to cope with trauma effectively. So how do we expect children to cope without giving them the tools and support they need? And that is very true to me. I mean, I know that as a 23-year-old, I am still struggling to understand and cope with the trauma that I have been through myself. And so I can only imagine for a child that is experiencing intense trauma, what it might feel like for them to really have nowhere to go or have no idea where to start to heal from this trauma. And so the first creative intervention that I decided to write about in my paper was called Child-Centered Play Therapy. And I'm sure that many of you guys have heard of this before, and it's actually something that I have been very interested in for a very long time. So one of my references described child-centered play therapy as a safe playroom filled with carefully chosen toys to help express emotions, experiences, and thoughts. And so when we say a safe playroom, that just means, it probably will just be the counselor and the child. There might be relaxing music on. Many times counselors encourage children to bring like a stuffed animal or a blanket that they might have that gives them comfort. Anything like that really adds to making that environment safe, which can help facilitate the level of comfort needed for the child to open up and to participate in these interventions. And so it says right here that children can recreate what happened to them, show the counselor family dynamics, or even use picture and word association to express feelings. Those are just a few examples of child-centered play therapy. And really it's just using different mediums and activities to kind of encourage children to put words to the things that they may feel, or even just to openly talk about the things that they've been through. And next, we have a very important line that I think kind of summarizes the whole importance of creative interventions with children. It says children already specialize in play, so this allows us as counselors to meet them where they're at. And I think that is one of the greatest roles of a counselor, is to not expect the client to meet us where we expect them to be, but to meet the client where they're at and learn how to meet their needs in that place. And so with a child that has experienced trauma, they may suffer with difficulties of communicating, difficulties building trust. And so we as counselors need to meet them where they're at by doing these interventions to encourage them to feel safe with us. Um, Allowing children to play out their trauma can encourage them to develop self-efficacy, empowerment, and a deeper understanding of the situation as a whole. This is something that is stated multiple times throughout my paper, as well as the PowerPoint, because it is very important for us as counselors to know what the goal of these interventions are. And many children, they develop a sense of control over a situation where they lacked control. They develop a deeper understanding of the situation, the traumatic situation that is either ongoing or has happened to them. And they develop a sense of self-efficacy. And we've learned in most of our psychology classes that self-efficacy is one of the most desired qualities in child development, because it leads to greater outcomes of positive relationships and higher levels of self-esteem and all kinds of other positive outcomes similar to those. And so right here it says, within their article, Pearson and Aguilera's state that there have been numerous instances of positive outcomes, reduced anxieties or PTSD symptoms, and overall increased happiness or positive behavioral changes after these treatments. And so that's referring to play therapy treatments that children have been participating in. And as you can see, there have been a lot of positive outcomes, which is great to see. And I think that is a big reason why many people are getting drawn to these interventions more and more so today. So some examples of child-centered play therapy are using dolls to reenact instances of abuse or conflict within the child's household. Many times children that live in homes where there is abuse, they don't understand or might not recognize that it's wrong or bad. And so they feel no need to really talk about it in the way that we would now as adults. And so giving children the tools like dolls or figurines to kind of act out that abuse, or if they have experienced sexual abuse as well specifically, this is a technique that is used a lot of times in that instance. They can play Feelings Candyland, where the colored spaces represent a different emotion. I actually got the opportunity to do this a year or so ago when I got to sit in on a child-centered play therapy session. And so what happened was the counselor had a Candyland game, but she made up a new set of rules where every time you drew a colored space, the color would represent an emotion or a feeling, and the child would give an instance of something that made them feel that feeling. So let's say that I were to have drawn a red square, and so I would move to the red square and I would give an instance of something that made me angry, because red stood for angry. And so it was really a great way to just get this younger child talking about different scenarios that either he's been through or could imagine that would make him feel these different ways. Some other examples we have are naturally allowing the child to play and carefully joining in. This would normally be seen in the first few sessions with the child, just kind of setting out toys and encouraging them to do whatever their hearts desire. And you as a counselor carefully joining in, maybe asking a few questions about what the child's doing, asking for permission to play with them and things like that will help foster that relationship and build more trust. We have a picture right here allowing child to play doctor on a plush toy after a traumatic procedure. This a lot of times is used, like I said, if the child has experienced a traumatic procedure or illness, and performing that surgery or doctor's visit on a doll or an animal is a good way to give that child a sense of control over the situation that they've endured. We have giving the child a magic wand and telling them they can make 3 wishes. That's another fun thing that you can do. And as you can imagine, it would give the counselor a great insight into maybe what the child craves, what the child is wanting desperately, or even just it could give a good starting place for the counselor to sort of ask questions off of and build off of. And then you have, tearing pages, knocking over blocks, or popping bubbles to relieve stress. Those are all great ways and safe ways for the counselor to sort of encourage the child to do these activities, to maybe let out some anger that they may feel. And then finally, we have encouraging the child to tell a story to the counselor about anything that they want. And so this is very similar to the narrative therapy that you might see for adults and other individuals, where the child has full control over the situation and can tell a story about whatever they want. Many times you'd be surprised that children actually end up pulling from different instances and parts of their lives and putting it into their own story. And the counselor is able to ask questions and kind of get an idea of the things that the child might be feeling or going through by the things that they talk about. So the second creative intervention that I wrote about in my paper is sand trait therapy. And you can see a lovely picture over here of sand trait therapy. So that type of intervention involves a counselor that's trained in the specific guidelines and certifications required to perform this specialty. So they would be a licensed sand trait therapist. There's varying levels of that. So this also includes a shallow tray filled with sand and typically miniature figurines added to the tray as well. And so you can see over here in this picture, you have the little tray with shallow sand. The counselor's not involved in playing in the sand. It's just the child. And over here on the wall, the counselor has tons of figurines, animals, and superheroes and things like that that the child can use in their tray. So with sand trait therapy, the counselor encourages the child to manipulate the sand and figurines in any way that they would like, to express emotions, thoughts, or experiences with little boundaries or rules. So I think one of the things that make sand trait therapy so beneficial is that the child really does have complete control and independence over the tray and what figurines they choose, what way they manipulate the sand, how they put the figurines together. And it can really give the child a huge sense of control over things that they might not feel control over in real life. The sand trait therapy must be given in a safe environment, very similarly to the child-centered play therapy. And as well as this, the child must be given unconditional positive regard, which is also similar to play therapy and other therapy as well. So sand tray therapy is especially beneficial for pre-adolescent children as their cognition shifts from concrete to more abstract ways of thinking. And so you can imagine how this would be beneficial because children are starting to shift from thinking that everything is more black and white to sort of opening their mind to more abstract ways of thought and allowing the child to pick different figurines to represent different people in their life or to manipulate the sand to mean different things as well is a great way to harness that abstract thinking and to encourage the children to really dig into that way of thinking as well. The goals of sand tray therapy are to empower the child, affirm alternative identities, and to affirm exceptional life stories. And so it's very similar to the things that we've seen, that children are really encouraged to use these creative interventions because it gives them a sense of power that they did not have. It really affirms the alternate identities. Children have different perspectives than a lot of people, a lot of adults in their life, and allowing them to vocalize or to even externalize their perspective and us to affirm them is very empowering for them. And as well as that, to affirm exceptional life stories. Many children that have experienced trauma don't realize the significance of it or, even the significance of non-traumatic events that they may have gone through as well. And so using these creative interventions is another way to affirm those for them. This technique also fosters a sense of independence within the child, like I mentioned before. Literally giving them as much freedom as they can with the sand tray therapy is a great way to sort of set in that thought for them that I am in control here and I get to decide what is right and wrong and what I feel. And so it is really amazing to see children open up just by having some freedom in these different activities. This is simply another medium used to encourage healthy and open communication and expression between the child, client, and counselor. So a lot of the patterns that you'll notice in these creative interventions is that they are relatively similar in the way that they are applied or manipulated in a way, but they are all different mediums that are used to create better communication between the client and the counselor. So explaining the meanings of sand tray therapy. So I actually have a personal experience with this. I just found this lovely picture on the internet because unfortunately I did not have the picture that my experience comes from, as well as when I got to sit in for the Candyland Feelings game, I got to see a child's sand tray therapy play out. And so I only got to see a brief part of the actual therapy, but she did show me a picture of the child's tray afterwards. And she was able to walk through with me how she interprets the tray as a credentialed sand tray therapist. And so in the tray that was given, the child was allowed to, pick out different figurines that represented different members of the child's family. And so for this specific instance, the child picked themselves as a princess. She really loved the princess. It was her favorite princess. She picked her mom as a really big, strong army warrior character that she had. And then she picked her siblings as, little animals and figurines that she also really liked. And so the interesting part about this is that she chose the figurine for her dad as a very scary, intimidating monster, a very negative figurine. And so in the sand tray therapy, they were organized in a way where her family was blocked behind these different figurines of animals and army men and, different barricades like, trees and things like that. And her dad was on the far end of the tray in his little monster figurine, and he had army men and everything pointed at him. And so already looking at that tray, you can tell that there's a sense of fear or maybe even distrust with her father in her life. And I later found out that that child was in the middle of a very toxic and traumatic custody battle between her mom, whom she preferred to live with, and her abusive father that was trying to win custody over her and her siblings. And so you can see how children, maybe not having the words to explain what they're going through, are able to explain it through these figurines and through the sand tray therapy just by the positioning of the figures, the figurines they choose for different members, and everything in between. So I thought that was a very interesting example of how sand tray therapy can be really beneficial in understanding family dynamics within a child client. So the third and final creative intervention that I chose to focus on is art therapy. And so art therapy is another extension of play therapy where the creative medium is forms of art. So it is another way for counselors and child clients to have more effective communication. And the mediums that are used here can be anything like drawing, painting, sculpting, and even Lego building. That is something that was added actually recently and has gained a lot of traction as well. So regarding art therapy, Desmond et al., one of my references, states that the use of creative arts applied in counseling allows clients to express their thoughts, behaviors, and feelings while becoming motivated to take responsibility for their own lives. And so we see a trend here. We see that these creative interventions are allowing children to regain the power in a situation where they felt maybe powerless or helpless. And so just giving them these different mediums and creative techniques and encouraging them to use them in whatever way that they see fit is allowing them to take responsibility for their feelings and their thoughts and the experiences that they've been through. Similar to creative interventions mentioned before, art therapy fosters a great sense of self-efficacy in children and allows them to gain control over instances where they lacked control. And so that is something that I've said for every single intervention, and it's something that I really appreciate about these creative interventions. A lot of times children are seen as an extension of their parents and not as fully developed individuals. And so I think that giving them these interventions where they do have their own control and power and they gain their own self-efficacy as an individual really helps them in not only healing from the trauma itself, but growing and developing as a person. This also provides a space for cognitive distortions to come out, giving the counselor more to work with in therapy. And so that was something that I found really interesting when I was looking into art therapy, is that many times, you know, if a child's told to paint a picture of themselves or to draw a picture of their family or things like that, where they're really expressing how they feel about themselves or others, many times counselors will notice trends of cognitive distortions that are found within the child's way of thinking. And of course, children are not going to have the words to express, you know, if they're generalizing everything or if they're noticing other trends and negative cognitions that may not even be true. And so counselors are trained to recognize these cognitive distortions in the varying different types of art therapy as well. And so I found that extremely interesting because cognitive distortions, as we know, can be a huge contributing factor to feelings of depression and hopelessness and worthlessness and things like that. Ultimately, empowering children to own their emotions and heal from their trauma is a large goal of trauma counseling as a whole. And so these creative interventions are just branches of these types of counseling that really, really strive to empower the child that is being seen and to also give them the strength to really own their own emotions and cognitions. So some examples of art therapy are painting or drawing, emotional expressions. So the child is able to see, you know, this is what someone looks like when they're sad. This is what someone looks like when they're really happy. Using Legos to build somewhere that they feel safe. So this could be, you know, like building a fortress for themselves. Who would be in the fortress? Who would be on the outside of the fortress? Where would your fortress be? Things like that are all great indicators of kind of figuring out the child's family dynamic, home life, and things like that. Making a paper plate mask to represent internal versus external feelings is another great exercise. Making a memory box filled with items of remembrance after a traumatic loss is also a great tool to use art therapy, especially when a child, has suffered a traumatic loss of maybe a loved one or a parent. Creating a magazine cutout collage to fit goals and dreams of a child. This is sort of similar to like a mood board or things like that that we may use as adults, but allowing children to build their own, you know, goals or dreams and kind of put all these pictures together is a great way to do that as well. Using modeling clay to pound out the child's anger or aggression, also great way to express stress, and even to build something after that as a way to show that even when anger or aggression sort of makes things all mushy and gross, that something beautiful can come out of it as well. Playing relaxing music and encouraging a child to paint a relaxing scene is another great way to sort of just build rapport, get the child thinking about where they might feel safe, what would be a perfect day for them, anything like that. And then drawing a child's family members from their perspective is also a great way to sort of get their own perspective of how they view their family members, what the family dynamic is of their house, and etc. So you can see some pictures down here. A child drew, you know, a family dynamic right here. We can see there's a lot of violence. We have like a helicopter and a tank. You know, we have a figure that looks like an adult with a gun, just pointing it at family members and all kinds of things like that. You know, I'm not trained to really break down these kinds of art yet, but you can see that there is a lot of hostility and probably a lot of fear within that child and their family. And then you can see right here, the picture of the heart. You have like different emotions that make up the heart, and you can see all these different feelings that this child is experiencing at once. And this could just be a great starting place to sort of go over the feelings with the child and what they think about each of these feelings. So the results of using these interventions is highly positive. Extensive research has been done and is still being done to test the validity and overall success of these methods. One of the things that I mentioned in my paper that is important to note here is that these studies are being done to test whether these interventions should be used over other interventions. And so there's no negative outcomes of using these interventions at all that has been shown. But the studies are still being done to test whether or not these are more effective than the currently used, trauma interventions with children. So it's a relatively new concept, and these methods have really started gaining traction in the early 2000s. And so I lucked out in that field because I did have a lot of really recent references, because this is such a new topic in counseling that has really, really grown over the past few decades. There's been significant positive outcomes with these interventions to effectively communicate with children who have experienced trauma. Like I said, there's been all kinds of positive outcomes of reduced anxiety, increased communication, building rapport with the counselor, and everything like that. Many children foster a sense of control, self-efficacy, and better understanding of their trauma after completing these interventions. Like I said in all my other slides, this is one of the best takeaways from these creative interventions, is that children really are walking away from this with a greater sense of who they are, what they are capable of, and what has been done to them. Myers describes the validity of creative interventions by stating, creativity in counseling is defined as a shared counseling process involving growth-promoting shifts that occur from an intentional focus on the therapeutic relationship and inherent human creative capacity to affect change. And so that's a big, long way of saying that these creative interventions really focus on fostering a healthy therapeutic relationship and really encouraging the child to hone into that natural human instinct to create and to be seen and to be heard. And so I really appreciate that we're allowing these children to have the tools and the safe space that they may need to really just foster what they are feeling, what they're going through. And I love this picture over here. It says, play is the child's natural medium for self-expression. And I think that is so true. Children play naturally with their friends and their peers, their family, with themselves. And so it only makes sense that us as a counselor, meeting them where they're at would be meeting them in an environment of play or creativity. So implications for counselors. Licensing and credentialing for all these various types of creative interventions are all obtained individually. So you would be, a registered play therapist, a licensed Childcentered therapist, licensed art therapist. There's all different kinds of specializations and credentialings that you could get. The requirements vary by state. So much like any other credential or specialization that you would get, it all depends on where you live. And so, as well as this, it was a bit tough to kind of hone in the specific credentialing that is needed for these licenses, just because there's so many different levels as well. I mean, you have, right down here, you see a registered play therapist, a play therapist supervisor, a school-based registered play therapist. And as well as that, there's multiple levels of, a registered play therapist. There's licensed Childcentered therapists, and then one higher than that. And so there really is all kinds of different requirements that one would need to look into and do a lot of research before deciding which specialty they wanted to pursue. But across the board, there is one thing in common, is that you must have a master's level of counseling related curriculum. And so that would just be, having a graduate degree in something like our program, which is clinical mental health counseling and things like that. So everything varies. There's a required 100+ hours of supervised practice in the specific field. It also varies on the different level of licensure that you want to pursue. It's around 100+ hours, give or take. As well as that, you have to get about 500 to 600 supervised hours of internship in the specific field. So that would be in either play therapy, Childcentered therapy, or art therapy. Counselors must also complete all levels of training in these specific fields and pass any examinations required. Many times for any level of these licensures, you just have to go through a set out training program and curriculum that is laid out over either a few days, few weeks, however it may be. And once you complete that, that's normally when you are allowed to complete your supervised practice and supervised internship. As well as this, there must be a high level of knowledge surrounding this group, cultural and diversity sensitivity, and a solid foundation of understanding towards the population in focus. So typically, individuals who pursue becoming a play therapist, Childcentered therapist, or art therapist would focus specifically on the population that they want to work with. And that a lot of times is individuals that have experienced trauma. And for this instance, you would be focusing on children and adolescents. So doing these creative interventions, a lot of times you will be working with children and younger individuals, just because adults, as you can imagine, would not be as open to doing these things at counseling, just because they are able to communicate more effectively than children are. And so there is a huge push for counselors that are pursuing these specializations and credentials to really dig in and do a lot of research over the population that they intend to work with. So in conclusion, children experiencing trauma are a special population, a very special population, and they should be handled with the utmost care, consideration, and patience. Obviously, I can imagine none of you would agree with or disagree with that, excuse me, because children really are the future of our world, and children lack a lot of resources that us of adults have. And so it's important that we as counselors, or just we as human beings, are advocates for children, because they deserve to have their voices heard and they deserve to be treated with the highest level of care as well. Creative interventions are a valid way for children to better communicate their feelings, thoughts, and experiences. This is something that we've gone over multiple times, but it needs to be stated again that it is really a great way for children to learn how to communicate these things. Creative interventions also build a high level of self-efficacy within the child, foster a sense of control and independence over the traumatic experience, and allows the child to process their thoughts in a safe and supportive environment. These are all really great things that we love to see in a counseling environment. It is so important for the child to feel safe and to feel supported, and to also have their own sense of control and independence within the counseling relationship. It's important for any counselor considering pursuing these specialties to do intense research and complete all necessary steps to gain credentialing, which is something that was expressed on the previous slide, is that it is important, like any specialization or any licensure or credentialing, that the counselor needs to do the most research they can to make sure they're providing the best service for their clients as possible. And so I decided to end my PowerPoint with this beautiful little basic tenet slide that I found on the internet, because I do think that it's important a lot of times to remind ourselves who children are, sort of breaking from that mold that children are just an extension of their parents or their families or even their culture, but are their own individual humans with their own feelings and thoughts and beliefs. And so you see, children are not miniature adults. Children are people. They have deep feelings, and a lot of times they don't have the ways to express those deep feelings. Children are unique and deserve respect. I think one of the things that I want to advocate most for is that children don't need to earn respect. Children deserve respect because they are their own individual humans. And I think that a lot of times that gets lost in translation with a lot of adults. And so I thought it was important to really hone in on that. Children are resilient. That's a lot of things that people really undermine of children, is that children really are resilient. And it is astonishing how much children can push forward through and to overcome, even at such a young age. Children move towards growth and maturity with intuitive wisdom. This is true. Many times children really do gravitate towards these people that do offer them respect, do offer them that sense of growth, or treat them like an adult, or treat them even like a real human rather than just a child. Children are capable of positive self-direction. Children's natural language is play, like I had mentioned before. Children have the right to remain silent. That is also true. If a child doesn't feel safe in a relationship, doesn't feel ready to talk about things yet, that's okay. And I think that that's something that also we need to remember as adults, is that just because we're telling a child to talk or asking them questions doesn't mean that they have to answer us if they're not ready. And we need to understand that as well. Children take the therapy where it needs to go. Trust. I think that that is also true, especially with these creative interventions, where a lot of times the child has the control to sort of lead the therapy in the direction that they are feeling. And many times the client is more intuitive and better at leading us where therapy needs to go than we realize. children's growth cannot be speeded up or sped up. I'm not really sure why it says speeded up, but be patient. I think that's also really important, is that a lot of times we expect our clients to move at the pace that we want them to, when a lot of times, like I had said, we need to meet them where they are and to sort of just be patient and to sit with them and to just be what they need us to be in that moment. And so right here, I have my lovely references from my paper. I had lots of great references that I got to look over, and it was amazing to really see all of the research done over such important and creative interventions. So I really hope you guys enjoyed my PowerPoints, and I am eager to watch the rest of you guys's. And here's to the end of a great semester. Bye, guys.